U.S. intelligence will face a shifting landscape of foreign threats as America's next president comes to office in 2025. It's an era defined by great power competition, with China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea aligning toward the goal of undermining U.S. diplomatic, economic, and military dominance on the world stage, all while advanced technologies, cyber hacking, and disinformation operations and other hybrid warfare tactics challenge the secretive realm of global tradecraft in unprecedented ways. I'm Guy Taylor, National Security Editor at The Washington Times, and for this edition of the Threat Status Influencers series, we're back on Capitol Hill in the office of Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Chairman Mark Warner, a Virginia Democrat and a major bipartisan leader on congressional oversight of the complex world of America's spy agencies. He's a former governor of Virginia, and he also co-chairs the Senate Cybersecurity Caucus. Senator Warner, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Guy.
Let's jump right into this. Your committee has repeatedly sounded the alarm about hacking and disinformation around the U.S. election. The intelligence community's latest annual threat assessment underscored strategic attempts by Russia, China, and Iran to magnify and exploit social divisions and sow discord. You've personally warned about deepfakes and said Americans are more susceptible to Russian influence operations now than in the past. Is the election really being impacted? And are you satisfied that Americans are aware of the threat here?
Well, Guy, one of the things our adversaries have realized is that misinformation, disinformation is cheap and really effective. And our adversaries use the openness of our system to try to take advantage of it. And as we go into these last couple of weeks before the election, I think the security of our voting systems is in pretty darn good shape. I think we will see from our adversaries, China and Iran in particular, on the presidential election, will ramp up as we get closer to election day. And because if this election ends up being as close as we think, the 2, 3, 4 days after the election is where we could really see bad things happening. So far, we've not seen the kind of use of deep fakes that we expected. That's good news. But we are starting to see some evidence. There was a recent case where Senator Ben Cardin thought he was talking to a Ukrainian official. It was a deep fake. That was a kind of example of kind of luring somebody in. It was a deep fake Zoom call. But think about the potential of a deep fake of someone who appears to be an election official election day or the day after election appearing to destroy ballots. And artificial intelligence can just simply allow these activities to be done at speed and scale that's unprecedented.
Let's talk about artificial intelligence and advanced technology and traditional intelligence. You've introduced the Secure Artificial Intelligence Act of 2024 that aims to address risks associated with AI. Why do we need this bill, and help me unpack the risks?
In artificial intelligence, I mean, we think about the obvious risk in terms of deep fakes in elections. The other area I've tried to point out, think how easy it would be to use artificial intelligence tools to manipulate the public markets, to basically manipulate a public stock and make money off of it. Matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we subsequently found that's going on even right now. What my bill does is, and it's bipartisan, is to try to look at, as we look at these standards on an international basis, let's make sure that we're at the table, we being the U.S. government and U.S. values, business values as well as the government. We did get 27 of the AI companies across the spectrum to sign a voluntary agreement on deep fakes in political campaigns. They frankly have not done much. What's interesting though, Guy, is about half dozen states have actually passed state laws prohibiting manipulation of political candidates in campaign ads. I think we need to do that ultimately at the national level, but how you do that is going to be a challenge, and we need to involve the AI companies.
What about the intersection between AI and U.S. intelligence and spy agencies? Are we at a watershed moment, and what matters there? I mean, is the CIA using AI?
Well, we are using AI kind of behind the scenes in terms of increasing productivity, but there are real questions. I remember when I brought in Sam Altman and some of the NVIDIA folks and others early on, and sat down with all the Intel community and said, do we need a single large language model for all of our information we collect, because we collect so much communications from NSA, spies from CIA may collect thumb drives, our satellites collect so many images. How do you just process all that in an appropriate way? Initially, we thought there might be just one, then each agency thought they would develop their own. And now we're maybe back to having a discussion about one. This is a tool that we need to use, because right now we have so much information coming in, we're not even able to fully process it all in a timely fashion.
Let's look out around the world a little bit. I want to ask you about Secretary of State Antony Blinken's recent piece in Foreign Affairs, where he addressed this alignment between autocratic authoritarian powers, China, Russia, Iran, to a certain degree, North Korea. At the same time, he wrote about how these countries, in his view, are not an axis. More hawkish observers completely call them an axis. And what do you make of this situation? And specifically, does the U.S. intelligence community have the capability now to accurately assess the sort of tissue of activity between China, Russia, Iran, North Korea?
Listen, I think all four of those nations, and I'd throw in Cuba and Venezuela as well, want to undermine American leadership in the world. They want to undermine our market-based economy. They want to undermine democracies. And I think we have a pretty good notion. Our spying ability in terms of traditional spying on another nation state or another nation's military, we're pretty good. Where we've got to make the transition is that we've got to look. I believe national security is much more than who has the most tanks and guns and ships and planes. It's who's going to win AI, who's going to win quantum computing, who's going to win, a whole series of areas around bio. You combine artificial intelligence and synthetic biology, and you've got some great opportunities, but some real potential negative opportunities. How do we align our intelligence community to go after that kind of spying as well? There, I think we've clearly got gaps.
You brought up Venezuela. What's your assessment of what's going on right now? Nicolas Maduro appears to have successfully stolen an election. The Biden White House was really focused on this election. Did they drop the ball? And what
we asked the Venezuelan people to get out and vote. They voted in record numbers, and even the most pro-regime parts of like a Caracas came out for the opposition. And it appears that Maduro lost by about a 2-1 margin. And I do think the administration should have pushed harder. I mean, we tried to get Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia, more left-leaning countries in the region, to force in the immediate aftermath. I frankly think they whiffed. I think we need to put more emphasis on this. One, if we're not going to stand up for democracy in our own hemisphere. And two, when Maduro gets reinaugurated at the beginning of the year, we could have another 4 to 6 million Venezuelans leave the country, and that means more problem at the border.
Let's go back to intelligence capabilities for a second. The CIA recently posted instructions on social media in Farsi, as well as Korean and Mandarin.
And Russian.
And basically saying, hey, there's a secure means of contact on the internet. You could reach out and help the U.S. government. This is like a recruiting ploy. Do you agree with this strategy? Is it something
I think we got to use all the tools we can. And people that are upset with the regime, where do they go? They go to the internet. And so having this ability to reach out and say, you want to go against your regime? Here's a way to contact. I can't get into not going to get into the results of that, but it also, if it ends up screwing with the minds of the bad guys a little bit in terms of the regimes, that's not a bad outcome either.
We're going to jump to the Middle East for a second. CIA Director William Burns said recently at the CIFR Brief Security Conference that basically the Iranian government's breakout time to make a nuclear weapon is down to a week or a little bit more.
Well, it's to have enough enriched uranium to actually produce a weapon. Now, that's different than the delivery of a weapon. There are longer timelines than some of those other component parts. And it's one of the reasons why I think there is an opportunity, and this is where we need to get to some level of a ceasefire in the region, because I think the Saudis, the Emiratis, many of the Gulf states, they really want our technology. They want to be players, for example, in data centers and AI. They want our technology. Part of the price of that will be, particularly for the Saudis, to recognize Israel and frankly have a full alignment of nation states in that region against Iran. Now that Israel has taken out Sinwar, taken out the leadership of Hezbollah, if we can get to that ceasefire, that realignment in the Middle East of the Gulf states to have a united front against Iran is a great opportunity. I just don't want it to pass by.
What role does U.S. intelligence play in terms of understanding Iran's plans and intentions?
We are monitor the Iranian regime very, very closely.
So some will argue that October 7th, the Hamas attack, Hamas being an Iran-backed proxy or supported by Iran, it's its own organic movement, but supported by Iran, similar to Hezbollah or the Houthis in Yemen. Some would argue that October 7 wasn't just an Israeli intelligence failure, but also a U.S. intelligence failure. Are you satisfied that the U.S. intelligence community, that reforms have maybe been made or adjustments made so that to prevent a future surprise attack by an Iranian proxy?
I think there were failures, but I do think they were disproportionately Israel, because we had much better visibility into Lebanon, into Iran, into some of the other nation states, much better on the West Bank. We had kind of outsourced the Gaza to the Israelis, and frankly, the Israelis had not done a very good job either. Nobody's going to make that mistake again. And there's been enormous loss of life, obviously, in the region. But the fact that Hamas has been so degraded, and all of the senior leadership, Hezbollah, the Israelis, were back up to their A game with the effort on blowing up the pagers. The willingness to take it stronger to the Houthis. I'm constantly amazed that there's not a more international outcry against the Houthis by their threatening, international maritime traffic. If there was ever a case of these were outlaws that need to be, attacked across the board, it is that the rogue group, the Houthis. But I think, suffice it to say, we have Iranian proxies on their back foot in the region.
Right now, the Biden administration is more or less behind the scenes in negotiating a full U.S. troop withdrawal from Iraq, and could pin down whoever the next U.S. president is to that type of a policy. Would it make sense for us to leave troops, some contingency?
I think my hope would be is that we've all learned lessons from what didn't go well in Afghanistan.
You brought up the enormous loss of life in the current Middle East conflicts. Another area where there's a very complicated civil war going on, where there's enormous loss of life, is in Sudan right now. A massive famine occurring, a civil war between basically two generals, and great power competition going on. With China involved, Russia involved, and Iran is actually involved in trying to back the Sudanese government. Are your eyes on this conflict in Sudan, and why?
And because, there are more people dying every day in Sudan than Gaza and Ukraine combined. And we have, there are lots of proxies. Frankly, there are no moral good guys in this case, other than the Sudanese people who want to have a chance at democracy. Both of the warring generals are pretty bad guys. And if we can show, and some of our, we've got Emiratis on one side, Saudis on the other, if we could actually show influence here to bring about both humanitarian aid and a level of a ceasefire, showing that America cares about what's happening in Africa, I think would help our standing across the global south. It would help our standing where we've lost in countries like Niger and Burkina Faso and Mali. I think there's a geopolitical reason here as well as a humanitarian reason. And frankly, it would only take in terms of the greater scheme of diplomatic and other kind of capital to put at risk, bringing about this and into this conflict it's the right thing to do, and it's also in America's best interest.
Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Mark Warner, thank you so much for joining me. Very interesting, very insightful. Thank you for joining this edition of the Threat Status Influencer Series. I'm Guy Taylor. Until next time.